It is 2 p.m. now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for our Equitable Future Depends on Forming Inclusive UX Teams Now. Our speakers today are Shara Coutourier and Hwang. Shara is a lead user researcher with 10 years experience in the industry. She's currently at 352, leading user research engagements that include strategy sessions, generative research, and usability testing. Ali is a senior product design lead for innovation at Nationwide. She has 10 years of experience working on enterprise solutions, studying user behaviors, and facilitating design workshops. Today, they will talk about the differences between diverse, inclusive, and multicultural teams, the current UX landscape, and how to start making our own teams diverse and inclusive. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A tab, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Additionally, please feel free to use the regular chat to communicate with us and other attendees as well. One thing you might want to note is just make sure that you're using the session chat and not the event chat. You can see which section you are in based on the tabs at the top of the panel on the right side of the screen. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand things over to Shara and Ali. Welcome.
Thanks for the intro, Audrey. So hi, everyone. We're so excited that you're here at UXL with us today. Only one small update. So it is going to be me and Shara talking, but Shara actually took a new position this week at Microsoft. So she's actually a senior researcher now. So congrats on the new gig, Shara.
Thank you.
I won't spend too much time talking about it since Audrey already gave the intro. And this is a super important topic. So we want to give as much of the time as possible to it. So let's dive in. So blink if you've ever uttered the words, "That's not our user." And, I would be honestly surprised if somebody just entered a staring contest with me at this point, because I myself have been super guilty of saying this so many times during my career that I have lost track. And this is because it's been ingrained into us as UX professionals that when we design for everyone, we design for no one. It's this idea that we can't focus on solving needs for everyone because we have to prioritize who to include and who to exclude if we're going to make a good experience at all. And lately, I've been starting to think about, is this a privileged statement for us to be able to say? Sometimes when we design for not everyone, it looks a little like this. So what about people who can't afford it? That's not our user. Or sometimes a little like this. What about women who are pregnant? That's an edge case. And then other times it may look something like this, although this is surely exaggerated for a comment. But the essence of it is there, right? So a user has left a review that an app or an experience is not going as expected, and the developer responds back, "Sorry, you're not our user." And deprioritizing, or worse, dismissing feedback for those outside of your target audience is something that we've unfortunately had to do over the years of us practicing UX when we choose to not design for everyone. And this is the impact of reality. When we define our target users, we are deciding who they are and also who they're not. And so this is a common paradigm that we often use to represent when we talk about our target user. It's a target in which we really want to pinpoint in on the center and zero in on who we're putting focus on. When in reality, as gatekeepers of our product, services, and design, when we say phrases like, "You're not our user," we unintentionally create outsiders and leave behind other populations. Oh, wait, what if we could design for everyone?
Yeah, so Ali and I believe that as technology matures, we are in a ripe position to bring in more outsiders and create products that may have unintentionally left behind marginalized communities in the past. So take, for instance, this adaptive gaming kit for Microsoft Xbox. Around 2018, it was estimated that 14% of Xbox One gamers had a temporary mobility limitation, and that 8% of gamers had a permanent mobility limitation. But the existing controller design for two-handed use unintentionally created outsiders, leaving users behind. So the Xbox team at Microsoft could have said, this is not our user, but instead the team challenged themselves to create a gaming solution that went beyond the one-size-fits-all approach. They forged a partnership with Logitech and spent a week meeting with a community of occupational therapists. During this week, they got to meet with many of the people that these therapists worked with, bringing them to the design table in order to work together to design a better solution. They embraced the challenge that perhaps they could create a personalized solution while at the same time designing for everyone. And this is an example of how we leverage tech and inclusive teams to design for communities that are often perceived as not our target user. And if we're honest, generally when we design for those who are often left behind, we design for many more. Technology like closed captions and touch devices are benefactors of work born out of a need for greater accessibility, but the impact has been resounding. And we're seeing progress across industries. For instance, in the ways that we collect data, we're being more mindful of the types of demographic information we ask. We're using personas that are going deeper to focus on behaviors, attitudes, pains. We're also listening to our customers and using technology to get closer to their stories. And even within our own organizations, we're designing our tech stacks in a way that allow us to rapidly design, test, and iterate, and work across our organizations to accelerate what we can learn in market. And while this is an exciting time for tech, as we see advancements in areas like robotics, artificial intelligence, mixed reality, Ali and I wonder if our desire to be more inclusive is keeping pace with the growth of technology. We illustrate here where we believe practitioners must be insistent about forming more inclusive teams now. Because as this gap widens between advances in tech and our desire to form more inclusive teams, the delta between the two can lead to unintentional, but nonetheless adverse and harmful effects. So today our talk will emphasize the importance and ways to form more inclusive teams in an effort to minimize this tech gap. But first I want to give a friendly warning about empathy. And we'll begin with a working definition from the Interaction Design Foundation, in which they define empathy as our ability to see the world through other people's eyes, to see what they see, feel what they feel, and experience things as they do. And we'd like to unpack this a little and start by saying we don't want to discount empathy and the value it brings into our work. It is important, but it's only a step to us becoming more inclusive. We'd like to challenge this us in service of them mentality. What if we could take our desire to be empathetic further? With language like our ability to see the world through others' eyes, we center ourselves with language grounded in our own abilities. And this, we worry, can become problematic. For instance, if you've never been pregnant, can you feel what it means to be pregnant? Like, can you truly put yourself in the shoes of someone who's pregnant? What we're doing instead is trying to serve as a proxy to very real pains and needs of others. And in our quest, as we begin to work on our projects and share these anecdotes that we learn, we start to try to tell these compelling stories to internal stakeholders. And in some ways, we're distilling and reinterpreting what our users tell us to achieve our business goals. And so I guess to sum this up, what we want to again emphasize is that empathy is important, but it's not a substitute for a lack of representation. And it will not be enough if we want to close the technology gap we highlighted earlier. But I'd like to explain it in another way. I don't know if anyone here has ever played the telephone game. I certainly have as a child. And the way you play the game, if you're not familiar with it, is you line up and you start with a story and you pass it down the line, whispering in the ear of each player. It's inevitable, but by the time you get to the end of the story, it's our last player, they repeat the story and they've added lots of color has been added, the context has changed, and laughter erupts and everybody has fun. But if we look at this on a more serious note, isn't this sometimes what we do in our own world? We talk with our users at the very beginning. We listen to them with all good intention. We take what they tell us, and then we roll it into our products, but we don't truly bring them along the journey. And so as we continue to retell the story, adapting it to the audiences that we're sharing different points of view with, the story inevitably changes. And at some point, when we ship that product, it doesn't look the same. And at worst, it may not serve the needs that we intended to serve in the beginning. So what we're saying is it's not enough to only consult our users in the beginning or ask them to validate our ideas at the end. Because similar to that telephone game, often our message changes over the time. And as we form themes and shed what we consider edge cases, we lose the true essence of what's most important to our users. And, if we take this even further and recall, for better or worse, tech tends to reflect the people who create it. We believe this can be for the better, but only if inclusive teams are the ones creating the tech. Because technology is not the bad guy in our story. In fact, we believe technology is morally neutral. So it's upon the teams that build the tech that will have the greatest influence over setting its course. And that's why we believe these teams must be inclusive. Well, let me give you one additional example. This time it's the story of wearable devices. In fact, it's expected that 121 million Americans by the end of this year will have a wearable device. But even as the adoption of this technology grows exponentially, there's a growing concern as well about the accuracy, particularly for people with darker skin tones. That's because the tech is grounded in a measurement called the Fitzpatrick scale, developed in 1975 to measure how different skin tones respond to ultraviolet light. Most wearable devices today have a green light that is able to penetrate skin, allowing the technology to read biometric data such as heart rates. Researchers are calling out the tech industry and its use of this 6-color scale, noting the limited categories for darker skin tones. That's because melanin is actually a very good absorber of green light, meaning that darker skin absorbs more green light, making it much harder to get accurate readings. In fact, the Gender Shades Project conducted a 2018 study that examined 3 companies, Face++, IBM, and Microsoft. And the study found that darker skinned females are the most misclassified group, with error rates of up to almost 35%. The maximum error rate for lighter skinned males, less than 1%. This is the case even as health-related algorithms are becoming FDA approved. Now think about existing healthcare disparities and how inaccurate readings may compound some tough and vulnerable moments for marginalized communities. So we share this story as a cautionary one, an example of tech outpacing our desires to be inclusive.
And this is why Shara and I think it is super urgent that our UX communities start forming diverse, inclusive teams now. These diverse, inclusive teams should be groups of people with varying age, gender, race, ability, and status in life who may not know what it's like to walk in each other's shoes, but we're all working together towards a more welcoming future. And forming teams for diversity, equity, inclusion today needs to go beyond tokenism and superficial quotas. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit about hiring, because sometimes when Shara and I talk to folks about forming teams, this is what comes to mind first, although it is not the only aspect of forming teams. So starting here, there are some activities and mindsets that we believe we should start leaving behind, which include screening primarily for empathy. And so we're not saying to drop it off completely, but rather cautioning it as a reminder that someone who is super empathetic is not a substitute for lack of representation on your team. We also think blind portfolio reviews can be much better. For instance, it really relies on who's represented in your pipeline. So consider if you were to release a job posting and you're going to keep it open for, let's say, a month. Then within that time frame, it's really dependent on who comes and applies. And so if, let's say, 90% of your applicants are white males, that's naturally going to affect the statistics of who makes it through on a blind portfolio review. And so if you think about the other 10% being everyone else, the likeliness of those folks trickling through to the next round are going to be much slimmer. We also think we should leave behind determining homogenized designs as good. And so sometimes portfolios and design work, we use well-known layouts and patterns that everyone's familiar with. And I think it's important that we don't mistake familiarity with best practices, especially with folks who may have varying backgrounds, education, and life experiences that may be reflected in how they want to express themselves to you in a resume or portfolio. Also, day-long workshops, while they're super well intended and it's to understand how well someone fits in your team, the message that you may also be sending is that someone has the privilege for spending a day with us. And so not everyone can easily take a day for a full workshop. So finding alternatives if your candidate cannot make a full day workshop is imperative. And so let's talk a little bit about keeping and starting things if we're not already doing them. And so the first is asking how somebody has incorporated inclusivity into their work in addition to empathy. And so Shara has a really good recent example of this.
Yeah, so as Ali mentioned, I recently joined Microsoft. And one of the stories I shared with Ali was that one of my interviews was with a now fellow researcher where the entire interview focused on inclusion. The interview, it was about 45 minutes and included behavioral questions to get examples of things I've done in my work. But then we also spent time going through a case. And I think that was particularly interesting and compelling for me because it gave me an opportunity to talk through how I would approach being more inclusive in my research and work. But it also gave me a chance to see in a real way how Microsoft thinks about it.
Yeah, thanks for that example, Shara. So that's definitely something we should all be thinking about for those of us that are especially hiring. Another one to think about is building a diverse pipeline. And this is more than just putting Black Lives Matter into your job description, which is something that Shara and I have seen before. This is actually being forward-looking and thinking about, okay, who is it that may fill a gap on our team that isn't represented today? How can we start to be forward-looking and start to build a diverse pipeline so when it comes to either us having a role that's available or if we're communicating with a candidate who's really good but we don't have a job for them at this time, we have more opportunities over time so that we're not reliant on that small window of when our job description is in the market. Also, expanding your team's view on what is good design. So as mentioned, people who come into UX, especially as we work towards building more diverse teams, people may have different perspectives and ways of executing good design. So it's really important to make that space in hiring and not, as we mentioned previously, determining homogenized designs as good. And lastly, take-home tests. This is a really good alternative that we've noted that can serve as an alternative to day-long workshops because in our opinion, it's a little bit more similar to when you do kind of individual contribution work. And so in that way, that person can take home the homework, come back, and then maybe do an exercise that doesn't take a full day with the team. But as we mentioned, forming teams is much greater than hiring, which is why we've based our talk today on forming teams rather than hiring teams. Anyone can form a team, not just hiring managers and HR folks. Forming teams is really about bringing people together with a common goal of action. And these people can be internal, external, clients or vendors. They can be industry specialists or entire communities of people that have nothing to do with UX. And they can also be fellow colleagues as well as users. So first, we'd like to tap in a little bit into the bringing people together aspect. So think for a moment what your current team looks like. So we've got some example teams here. We've got the lone UXer, where it's a single person who's performing UX on their own. Then we've got the haha, we're the same person. So this is where you have a team where people may be dressed alike, look alike, talk alike, think alike. Then we've got the token diversity, where all the diversity is embedded in one person, and that person is your token diversity. Then we've got the Arnold Palmer, and this is what we call the half and half, where you're kind of diverse, where you're either one of two things, iced tea or lemonade. And then we've got the one person, one voice. So this is like irrespective of whether or not your team is diverse, you have one person whose perspective and ideas triumph everyone else's. So in that situation, it really didn't matter that you had or didn't have a diverse team. And then we've got mostly diverse teams. And so when you look at these bubble people, what did you picture? Like, who did you exclude when you pictured some of these in your head? And in thinking about your own team, are there people that are missing or underrepresented? Well, let's talk a little bit about the different types of diverse teams. So firstly, having a diverse team, you can have a group of people that have different backgrounds, just making sure that representation as well as demographic distribution is across the board. But if you take it a step further, you can build inclusive teams. So this is giving your diverse groups of people a space to not only voice their ideas and opinions, but also be heard and valued and have their perspectives considered when it comes to the big decisions that are being made on the team. And then we've talked a little bit already about multiculturalism in today's keynote, but having a multicultural team means that you're not only including and celebrating diverse backgrounds and perspectives of folks around the world, you're really creating an environment where folks can both literally and metaphorically come in and let their hair down and feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work. And this is a situation in which people don't have to conform to be the norm, but maybe there's not even a true norm because different modes of who people are accepted. And I think this kind of goes back to what we heard about Black joy, right? Like people can celebrate in different ways in this safe environment. So let's talk about actually bringing people together. And so we're going to talk about the easiest way currently. So if you have an existing team, you may not be in a position to bring others onto your team right away. And so bringing proximal people together is the easiest way. These are people who are near your work and are easy to team up with. And so oftentimes they might be fellow associates. So whether it's somebody who's on your extended team or someone who's in your larger organization and company, it's really about identifying who's in the room right now, who may not be represented, and do we bring these right people to the right activities? So for instance, if you're about to launch a brainstorming workshop, take a look at your team. You know, is it an all-white team? Are there not people of color represented? Who can we bring in to make sure that different diverse perspectives and communities of people are represented? That said, it's really important that we don't burden the one of few in the organization.
Yeah, as a personal story, I've previously worked on teams where I was the one of few, sometimes the one of few in an organization. And while I'm always happy to help, a few things to consider if you find yourself reaching out or bringing in one of the few in your own organizations. And that is, first, no community is a monolith, right? So I may have a point of view on what it means to be a Black woman, but I'm in no way a spokesperson for all Black women because we know intersectionalities exist. And any inclusive team will want to acknowledge that. There may be certain things that I understand as a Black woman that I will never be able to completely understand as a Black trans woman, a Black woman who's older, a Black woman who's younger, just had different life experiences. And so it's really important to point that out as well. Going back to the bubble people Ali shared with you all, in which she challenged you to think about, as much as you think about who you are consulting, think about who you're not consulting and leaving behind potentially. And additionally, you just don't want to overburden one member of your team or organization, as it can create unfair emotional labor tacked onto their already existing responsibilities.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Shara. So another way that you can bring proximal people together, so of course this one is reliant on if you have existing client-vendor relationships. So if you have an established relationship with a client or vendor, think about if there's someone who's not in the room with you. Is there someone you can bring on your side or even request on the other side that can bring valuable ideas in a new way? And I bring this up because actually Shara and I met through a client-vendor relationship in which we were both brought on as new perspectives to try to bring different ideas into the room. Both of us are designer researcher backgrounds, but we bring different perspectives because of who we are and our lived experiences. And also, when we talk about bringing in an outsider point of view, we're not talking about bringing in the devil's advocate person, that person that will put on the challenger hat and come in and say no but to everything. We're literally talking about bringing in additional diverse talent. Which brings us to our second way of bringing people together. So bringing outsiders in. And so these are folks that may not be necessarily close to the work or project team. We've already mentioned a little bit about client-vendor relationships, so that is an option. However, we are going to be talking about other folks that may require more effort to bring in, such as customers and users and communities.
Yeah, and this is something we're pretty excited about, which is pushing the boundaries of what defines a team. Can we bring our customers and users into a more permanent spot at the table? We wonder what would happen if we gave our users decision-making rights, allowing them to not just influence, but truly own parts of the experience, of their experience. Remember that adaptive gaming controller? In that story, every user gets to customize their gaming experience and how they interact with the device. Allie and I have been actually workshopping a research question in which we asked users flat out, what would they do if they own this experience or a piece of this business, or maybe in some cases, even the whole business? What decisions would they make? And this isn't just about us focusing on happy paths, because some of the most interesting cases are on the edge. Similarly, bringing in community partners is a great way to amplify the voices of users who may be missing from your team. And unlike overburdening the one of few in your organization, these groups are really great at recognizing intersectionalities and capturing the stories and needs of individuals. Very similar to how in that adaptive gaming controller example, Logitech and Microsoft could have easily tried to empathize and understand what the users needed, but instead they decided to connect with community partners like occupational therapists and truly try to connect with the individuals who would benefit the most and bring them to that table.
And so next, we want to pivot towards the second half of this statement. So common goal of action, because it's not enough to only bring people together. And so, like we said, we need to form teams of solidarity over, not in place of empathy. So like we've mentioned, empathy is super important, but it is not the most important thing. So can someone who is without emotion be a great designer? So a colleague of ours, John Hoyt, had a great example. So take a person with autism, for instance, who might struggle with recognizing emotion and having empathy. Do you think that a person who has autism can be a great UX professional? So Shara and I do believe that a person with autism could be a great designer, because what's more important than that person in feeling what their users feel, seeing what their users see, and putting themselves in another person's shoes is simply their ability to learn from users, customers, and work together to commit to an action to improve a user experience. And that unity and agreement of feeling action on how to move forward is solidarity. With that said, we do want to caution that we don't want to use the word solidarity as the word of the day. We have picked it because we believe it is the best word that we feel is going to bring diverse, inclusive teams together and commit on how to move forward. So let's talk about a few common goals of action. So naturally, our current jobs aren't going to change that much. So when you have brought diverse folks onto your team and you're creating an inclusive environment, your current job is still going to expect you to determine key learning objectives, formulate hypotheses, brainstorm concepts together, and whatnot. What we ask is, as we move forward, you really consider bringing in diverse folks into the picture to help them make those sorts of key decisions. There's a few new common goals of action that we believe that our equitable future depends on. The first is creating inclusive environments where everyone can bring their whole selves to work. And this we've already talked about in some aspect, but creating that inclusive environment, like we mentioned, is a place where somebody can let their whole selves, invulnerably and be who they are. But it also means the other side, where if you are not that diverse person, you're welcoming them by, for instance, not saying microaggression or racist comments. I'm actually going to give up an example. So recently, and this is not super recent, somewhat recent, I sat on a call where a colleague who was a white male meant to make a joke. And what he said on a call where there were two Asian folks sitting on the call was, "Oh, I can't get into Miro right now. Miro is Japanese for I can't get into the website," which in the moment I was like, oh, boy, like, I'm not Japanese. Should I give him the benefit of the doubt, or is this a microaggressive comment? Either way, we really have to watch ourselves in what we say to our teams to make sure that we are making a safe and inclusive environment where people do feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. The second aspect is serving the needs of a broader audience by bringing outsiders in consistently and pay them. So kind of to what Shara was saying earlier about bringing outsiders in, so users or even communities, a lot of folks that may not be your target user today may live on that edge case in the non-happy path. And so starting to think about, like, what does it look like if we move towards a future where we're personalizing experiences for everyone? Who else can we bring in now so we can learn from them and understand what those edge cases are? Because they may not be edge cases. And then lastly, hold each other accountable and bring your bias. And when we talk about bias, Shara and I are saying, yes, minimize your biases when we talk about stereotypes, profilings, and your assumptions. When we say bring your bias, we mean bring your lived experiences, your skills, and who you are into the room.
Yeah, I thought about this in regards to a colleague of ours, Elizabeth, who was conducting a study around women and the impact of divorce. And she invited a key stakeholder who happened to be a cis-het white man to observe. And he pushed back, noting his bias as a man that couldn't possibly relate. But we pushed him on this. And while appreciating his willingness to center women, it was still important that he was a part of the work. He called out having biases, but like Ali said, biases aren't all bad. They are often shortcuts our brain creates based on our own experiences and backgrounds. And those experiences and backgrounds are things that we want to know. We want to be able to talk about, because we believe that is how he is able to share parts of his experience at the appropriate time to understand how the entire team could show up in solidarity for our users. And in this case, this was about women dealing with divorce. And so we want to acknowledge that this could be a cultural shift for some organizations. And we understand that change does not come easy or fast. But we do believe well-formed, inclusive teams have a few common characteristics. And if you have established the appropriate team norms and rules of engagement, you should begin to notice that team members can shed desires to feel accepted and instead show up as their authentic selves with the willingness to hold difficult conversations. You'll also see that before taking on a new project, team members are open to discussing and acknowledging their similarities and differences. They also are willing to examine what voices are missing from the room and constantly think about ways to bring a more diverse set of voices throughout the product lifecycle. Members will expect to challenge their own assumptions and prioritize the need to do the right thing over simply being right. And finally, they make sure that they are actively listening to all of the voices in the room. So as Ali mentioned, we've worked together in the past, and what we believe to be on a team that was on the path to being more inclusive. And one of the things I recall about our team is that at the very beginning, before the work began, or actually as a part of the work, we took time to get to know each other. And this went a long way in us being able to have really difficult conversations and talk through cultural nuances and identify opportunities to expand the type of users we wanted to serve and to ensure that we could show up as our full selves. So I recall us having conversations with the white males on our team and really challenging them to advocate for us and to speak up when they saw us being cut off. And they did. And it was really important in our ability to make sure that our voices were heard, but not only that, but the perspectives that we wanted to bring into the room and the things and the voices that we wanted to bring from our users and share their stories as well. And so I think that Jill Perry Smith has really summed it up nicely about the importance of inclusion in teams in this quote based on a study that she conducted several years ago. And it says that individuals tend to pay more attention to novel insights contributed by people different than themselves. We expect people we know well, who tend to be like us, to think like us. When they offer new information, we discount it. Yet, when an acquaintance offers new information, we pay attention, play with the new information, and are more creative. And when multicultural, inclusive teams form, the collective is just far more creative and more likely to broaden the users that they are able to design for.
So to wrap us up, forming diverse, inclusive teams is only the start of closing our existing technology gap. So Shara and I have not brought up Bruce Tuckman's team development framework yet during this conversation because we're not sure it's the right framework when talking about forming diverse, inclusive teams. However, if we were to make assumptions today that we were to follow this framework in getting to a point where we're closing in on that technology gap, we're really over here on the far left in forming. And so as Shara just mentioned, when we were on a team previously together, there was a lot of openness and vulnerability and also confrontation in some instances where we had to acknowledge what was going on with the team, which, you know, with naturally, as you hire or even form diverse teams, there's going to be a potentially storming period before you can get to a point where you are inclusive as well as multicultural. And that is why our talk today is actually really a call for action. We need to start forming diverse, inclusive UX teams now because our equitable future depends on it. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll hand it back to you, Audrey.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Shara and Ali. For the next few minutes, we'll go ahead and take some questions. So if you have any questions, please go to the session tab on the right-hand side of the screen, and in the Q&A area is where you'll post your questions. We already have a few, so we'll go ahead and get started. This one question asks, any ideas for how to know who you are not considering in a team/project? In personal experiences, sometimes I don't know I'm missing a piece because I didn't know there was a question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. One of the ways that I have started to do this on my teams, even project teams that I'm not hiring for, is I actually put everyone's faces to a slide and I look at it. And I know that it is a very surface level way to look at the team, but it's a starting point to say, oh, are we having a team that's primarily white? Are there other folks that aren't represented here? How can we mix it up so that we have good representation? I know that there's probably other ways that Shara and I haven't thought about, but I know that that's an easy way to at least visually look at like, who is our team, who's on our extended team, and then zoom out beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next question is, are there any guidelines we should keep in mind if we implement take-home interview assignments to be more equitable? Is there a reasonable time expectation? Should they be paid?
I think that's a really good question. I actually saw this in a community of Black designers and women, actually more broader women in tech, in which someone came into the group really vulnerably and shared that they were really excited about an interview. They got a take-home test or assignment, in which I'm sure some of you have done. I've certainly done my share of these. And she stated that she was going to have to spend almost, I think, exceeding 8 hours on this test. And for her, that just was really extreme when compounded with all of her other kind of work and life responsibilities. And so I think one of the things to keep in mind is, thinking about time boxing them, thinking about what you're trying to ultimately achieve. So this shouldn't be in the spirit of trying to get free work, but really for someone to demonstrate their thinking and thinking, as we are innovators in our own world, how can we get at that as quickly as possible? And almost giving ourselves a design challenge around how can we create these tests in ways that will give people the space to demonstrate their abilities and to show up, but also at a place where we're not further taking away or creating additional labor and unpaid labor at that for them.
Great. Okay, our next question is, I was surprised that the FDA approved problematic technology with a high margin of error for people of color. Is there anything we can do to influence the criteria they use to approve products?
I mean, I was surprised too, as I was kind of researching this. I had heard like anecdotally concerns. I believe there was something called Tattoo Gate a few years back where folks with just dark tattoos in general were having troubles with these devices. And what I saw was really a community of scientists pleading with the tech industry to do something. And I think this is a really interesting case because there's this, we're kind of coming to this point of this inflection point where, like I said, the adoption of this tech is just so significant and growing exponentially. And of course, then there is the financial side of it, right? And the financial incentives. And this is where we talk about adverse effects happening and trying to realign those incentives. And I think it really does start with us in terms of amplifying these stories. Like I said, when I was reviewing some of these studies, each journal article ended with pleas from the scientific community saying, please speak up about this, please amplify this, please talk about this, because this is concern. And like we said, as we think about healthcare disparities and potential impacts there, it's very real. And so I think the first step is, just having the conversation and talking about it more, and then thinking back into our own work and thinking about, are there things that we can do in terms of how do we form these more inclusive teams to make sure that these voices are being heard and these stories are being told about what happens and the impacts when there's just such a skew in the data.
Yeah, and I would only add one thing to build off of what Shara is saying, is if you look at the error rates here, and this is why we've really formed our platform on forming inclusive teams, this error rate is actually interestingly scary in the fact that if you think about the tech industry, it's predominantly white males. Mm-hmm. And we know that Black females are really underrepresented in the tech industry. And so if you think about the error rates here and start to go, okay, wait a second, if maybe we were more diverse as teams in building this technology, would some of this stuff have come to light earlier rather than after we made it into market?
That's an excellent point.
So it sounds like what we're proposing is not only trying to fix the problem after we recognize it, but trying to avoid them altogether.
Yes.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have another question in the chat. What is the biggest example of an organization who thinks they are creating a diverse, inclusive team, but not really achieving that? it sounds like they're not trying to call organizations out, but saying like, what mistakes have you seen organizations make?
Yeah, Shara, I don't know if you have an example, but I have I have one small one, and Shara, you can roll on this since this is just what came to my mind firstly. So what's interesting is I've been in an environment where a company thought they were really diverse. In fact, they hired quite a few diverse folks, non-white folks, to be frank. And I was sitting in the office and I was looking around, and I realized they accidentally put all the people of color in the same row of desks. And as I looked around the office, I was like, oh crap, I'm in the diversity row. So this was a situation where the company thought it was woke, it was Black Lives Matter, inclusivity. And then all of a sudden, when you looked around, they were missing big signs where they weren't making us feel safe and inclusive. In fact, we all stuck out like a sore thumb because we sat in our row from one another. So I think that's an example of just like keeping your eyes peeled. And you may think that you're in a diverse environment today, but if you were to look around, is that really the case? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Just being mindful. I think I've seen organizations that are more performative in nature and things that we have to be mindful of. So it's great to state how you believe Black Lives Matter, how much you're donating to Black Lives Matter. But to Allie's point, even with this story around the wearable devices, are we really recruiting and bringing in more inclusive folks when it counts? Are we giving people jobs, giving people opportunities? Are we giving people the same place to fail? Very similar to some of the things we even heard in the keynote earlier today around having that space to take chances at things and not feel like you have to be so buttoned up. And are we making the environment safe? And so I think it's really important for organizations to take those active steps than just more of the kind of performative steps.
Okay, our next question is, I have been doing UX for more than 30 years. Yes, 30, exclamation mark. And now I am experiencing a lot of ageism in my job search. How can this be combated when it seems that society equates technology with the young?
I mean, I think this goes back to, we talk about some of the hiring methods, and I know we didn't hit on that very heavily here, but for those that are in the room and that have the influence and or power around hiring, it really goes back to thinking through how we even recruit, right? What information do you need to absolutely know to determine that a candidate is good for this role and a good fit for this position? And I would argue that it's more about those life experiences. And I think that as UX designers and researchers and professionals in this space, it's incumbent upon us to design those systems in ways and continue to challenge the powers that be around these things, right? So for those that are working on enterprise kind of products and internal products, continuing to show up and advocate and bringing those voices in. And I would challenge everyone here, which goes back to our story of looking around the room and thinking, like I said, I'm a Black woman, but I may not be a Black woman with 30 years of experience in this space. So it's worthwhile for me to seek out someone like that or someone who looks completely different than me, to make sure I'm getting those points of view as we think about how we design our products, because that example is directly an impact of what happens when we don't.
Yeah, and I would just add one more thing, which is we're all UXers here. So think about what we do when we recruit for users, how we make sure there's a good spread of diversity with the people that we interview. Why can't we do that with our teams too? Like making sure that we have that good spread of age, gender, sexuality, et cetera, when we build our teams in the same way we build our recruits.
All right, we have one more question. Allie mentioned that using face shots to try and check diversity, but is there a good way to make sure you are including different cultures that are different but have the same skin tone?
Yeah, that's actually a super good question. So what I would say is I don't think I have an awesome solve for this, because I think this is something we're all trying to work through together. I know that in managing a couple teams in the past and also leading some teams now, something that I like to do as an exercise Shara mentioned, which is everyone come here, share your background. Let's, put down our walls and kind of bring our bias and talk about who we are, where we came from. In the same way, I think Mike mentioned he's a Portuguese immigrant. I think to come in and have that sort of openness and talk through that as a team, sometimes you can't even see some of the experiences someone may have gone through just simply looking at a picture. I think my comment previously about face shots was just, it's an easy way. It's a very quick way that's going to take you probably no less than 5 or 10 minutes of your time to get a sense of if your team at least looks diverse. But that's only one way. Shara, did you have anything?
Yeah, I can actually harken back to my time as a recruiter, and I can say on different days, but one of the things that I would do, and this goes back to a point we made around partnering with communities, right? So if you don't have that expertise or you're not sure, this is where you can leverage communities. I used to do this often. If there were certain groups or organizations that I wanted to make sure that I had representation from, and I wanted to make sure that I understood, well, sure, we have someone who's Black, but maybe we want someone who also understands what it means to be a Muslim. And maybe we want to understand what it means to be Black and Christian, right? So what I would do is then work through these organizations that had a really good perspective and understood how to tap into these particular groups and individuals to connect me in that way. So I think that's could be a really great place to start. Like I just mentioned, I'm a part of a community of Black women who are in technology or interested in tech, who are often asking and seeking mentorship and wondering, how do I just get started? And we have people, and it's not just limited, but then we open up those opportunities for them to get in front of other folks who have said, hey, I know we're missing this voice from the table, and you can plug into these communities and instantly connect with those folks.
Thank you, Shara. Thank you, Allie. Okay, we'll go ahead and end the Q&A portion just to give everyone a little bit of a break before our next session. But before we go, we'd love for the audience to fill out a quick survey about the session. So there is a link to the survey in a pinned message in the chat section. And that'll be right at the top of the chat section. If you're looking for a more general attendee survey, those can be found in the reception area, which is in the left-hand navigation. But thanks again, everyone, for attending. I want to thank our amazing speakers for their talk, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their UX Y'all experience.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.